Guys who married bridezillas. What happened after the wedding? My coworker married a true bridezilla. Let me just hit the main points of what happened before, during, and after the wedding. A week after he proposed, she quit her job, claiming her new full-time role was planning the wedding. Things went downhill fast. During the planning, she got into a major fight with his mom because she demanded the groom's mother pay for half the wedding, but have no input or say in the guest list, which was 95% the bride's friends and family. When the groom's mom refused, the bride, who was 30 years old, egged her future mother-in-law's house. When the groom confronted her about it, he went to work, and she shaved her head while sobbing and sent him a video of herself screaming in the bathroom. I was at work when it happened. He showed me the video saying he had to leave early. I urged him to get her professional help, but he just laughed it off with a joke about crazy relationships being the best kind. I honestly pitied him. The wedding itself was in a small pool clubhouse in the middle of summer. The space was far too small for the 150 people they invited, and no one turned the air conditioning on until after the room was packed. By then it was sweltering. A lifeguard in a swimsuit came to turn it on, but it didn't help much. 2 rows of chairs were marked as reserved, but stayed empty until the ceremony started, when the 6 seated bridesmaids took them. That left only a dozen other seats available, forcing elderly guests to stand or sit on the floor. The bride showed up 90 minutes late because she didn't like her hair and makeup, so she redid them herself. All the guests stood waiting in the heat, and the groom was left sweating in a wool suit, visibly anxious, unsure if she would even show up. When she finally arrived, she burst into the clubhouse, marched down the aisle, and snapped at the officiant to hurry up and get started. During the prayer, while the religious groom bowed his head, the bride waved at guests, told her mother to get her water, and drank during the prayer. She barely paid any attention to the ceremony itself. Afterward, tables were crammed into the small clubhouse, and only the bride's family and close friends had seats. The rest of the guests had to stand outside in the July heat, surrounded by bugs for the reception. The bride refused to leave her table and made the groom fetch her food multiple times, despite people insisting he sit down while they helped. But he wouldn't. She told him to do it, so he did. She didn't greet guests, make a speech, or mingle. Most of us didn't see the cake cutting or the dancing. The next day, as they were leaving for their honeymoon, they had a huge fight. She blamed him and his mom for everything that went wrong at the wedding. She even threw his luggage out of the car and tried to drive off without him, but he had the tickets and jumped on the hood to stop her. A month later, he got fired for showing up late, leaving early, and taking off in the middle of the day, usually because she called him with some kind of crisis. A year after the wedding, I got a thank you note for my gift. It was signed only by the bride, with a note saying, "As you may have heard, Ryan and I had a bumpy start in our first year and are separated now. Thanks for the lovely gift." They divorced a couple of months later. I've performed a few wedding ceremonies that came about because something fell through at the last minute. Only once did I have to walk away. My sister-in-law called me about a friend of hers whose priest had passed away the week before their wedding. They didn't want to change the date or reschedule, so she asked if I could step in. I said sure and asked when the wedding was. Turns out, it was in an hour. I was on my way home from work, where I just finished an important meeting. Luckily, I was reasonably well dressed, so I called home to let them know I'd be late and headed to the venue. When I arrived, the couple took one look at me and asked if I had proper priest's vestments. No, and even if I did, I certainly wouldn't be carrying them in my car. The bride asked if I could go buy some and then come back. I told her I wouldn't even know where to begin finding something like that. The groom then said, "If you can't even try, maybe you should leave." So I did. Later, my sister-in-law told me they ended up cornering a priest at the church, threatening to sue for breach of contract if he didn't marry them on the spot, saying it was the moral thing to do. They divorced 9 months later when the bride's surprise baby turned out to be a different ethnicity than the groom. To make things even messier, he had a side relationship of his own. My cousin was married to a bride who turned out to be quite the handful. He grew up in a not-so-wealthy area, but became very successful after moving away from his hometown. His wife, on the other hand, came from a life of extreme wealth, some might say excessive. They got married after only a year of knowing each other, and the wedding plans were a shock to everyone. They spent over $250,000 on the event, which included catering from 5 to 7 different restaurants. The food featured dishes from various cultures, cooked live in front of the guests, like a hibachi buffet. Later in the night, servers in tailed suits and white gloves were passing out Taco Bell after midnight when everyone was drunk. After the wedding, things quickly unraveled. She was spending far more than he could earn, and she started blaming him for not making enough money, despite not working herself and there being no children in the picture. The marriage ended in divorce after just 1 year. When it came time to finalize everything, she gave him a choice: get his wedding ring back or keep their dog. He chose the dog. Unfortunately, things didn't end there. Her sister, a lawyer, helped her file a restraining order against him, and they haven't spoken since. In hindsight, while it was a messy situation, it's clear he dodged a bullet. I forgot to mention, they finalized the divorce exactly 1 year and 1 day after their wedding. My brother's fiancé went off on my mom in front of me and my sister when he was 45 minutes late to the rehearsal because his best man's car had a blown tire. She screamed, "Where is your a-hole of a son?" Honestly, my brother should have never shown up for the wedding. She wasn't just a bridezilla, she was a full-blown sociopath. Her entire life was fabricated, and her parents, who didn't even show up for the wedding, called my mom the day after to reveal the truth. Turns out, she had a rap sheet a mile long and a prison record. But my brother, ever the optimist who believed people could change, stuck it out with her for 7 long years. Don't do that. Don't ever, ever do that. I married a groomzilla. He insisted on costume changes between the wedding and reception, yelled at the wedding planner, and we had endless fights over things like whether to add fruit kebabs so guests might actually get enough to eat. It was all about him, with zero compromise. He made a lot of promises about things I wanted after the wedding, like a beach vacation, but none of them ever materialized. Turns out, no compromise at the wedding meant no compromise anywhere else. I left him after 4 years of marriage. Best decision ever. My uncle married one. She had a spending problem, acted like she was better than everyone, couldn't maintain friendships, and cheated on my uncle with a man 10 to 15 years younger than her. She was also obsessed with clubbing, treating it as a lifestyle rather than a casual activity. She would go out almost every weekend, both Friday and Saturday, getting drunk and often staying at friends' houses, even if they weren't comfortable with her late-night habits. She'd get upset if her friends didn't want to go clubbing as often as she did. Meanwhile, she was neglecting her day-to-day priorities, including spending time with her kids at home. It wasn't the act of going to clubs that was the problem, but the obsession and irresponsibility that came with it, especially at her age. Thankfully, my uncle has since remarried and is much happier now. Our friend, he and my husband met when they were kids, so we're talking about almost 20 years of friendship, married a bridezilla. She's evangelical, and religion is basically her entire life, while he was agnostic, a nice metalhead geek guy. They asked us to be part of the wedding party, as best man and woman. My husband and I are both tattooed, and when we arrived at the wedding, we were his only friends there. Everyone else at the big wedding was from her, now his, church. The preacher kept saying that he had his old life, and now his new life, his old friends, and now new friends, yada yada. But all the while, he was criticizing his old ways, his authentic self. And everyone kept looking at my husband and me like we were beasts. Worst day ever. She's the type of person who wants to be an influencer. Everything is on her Instagram. Their relationship seems perfect there, but he always looks so unhappy, so apathetic, especially when we used to see him before the pandemic. He would always talk about how they are so different, how everything is the way she wants it. Her Instagram stories are basically her saying that he does nothing right. It's even humiliating. She made him stop talking to us. This last week, he got out of every group we were in, and he stopped responding to my husband, who's really sad that he lost his friend. I believe she's the one replying to the few weird messages he gets. That's the bridezilla. It seems pretty common for them to act perfect on social media, while in real life, things are a mess. My friend didn't marry a bridezilla, but he did date a girl who posted about engagement rings and such just 1 month after meeting. This was back in 2014, tagged on Facebook. They dated and got engaged in July 2018, and for over 4 years, she posted about the wedding. Literally 4 straight years of wedding-related content before even being engaged. The two had nothing in common, literally nothing. They were both nice people, but she leaned far left and he leaned far right. We questioned both of them and asked how they expected to raise kids together with such different outlooks on life. Their excuse was, "We don't talk politics, so we never fight." Well, now they're both single. She was so caught up in the wedding planning from day one that she never stopped to think about what life would be like after the wedding. My ex-fiancé was perfectly normal until we got engaged. She went from wanting a small, simple wedding with less than 100 guests to wanting a grand hall and inviting everyone she'd ever exchanged more than 3 words with. She even wanted to import flowers. It made no sense. The final straw was when she scheduled an appointment with a real estate agent to sell my house to pay for the wedding. Her family was loaded, but they weren't going to contribute anything. So I broke it off. She got engaged again a year later to an attorney and didn't read the prenup before signing. They got married, and 1 month later, they divorced. She got nothing and is still alone. My ex-best friend was a bridezilla. She'd always been a bit short with people and had a quick temper, but I put up with it because we used to have a good laugh together. I met someone and was with him for 3 years before we got engaged. We were engaged for another 3 years before we got married, and we'd been friends for 4 years before we started dating. Before we got married, she used to stay at our house all the time, and we all got along. Then she met a guy. Actually, my husband helped her get together with him since she liked him, and my husband worked with him. After about 4 months of dating, they got engaged. That's when things started to change. She started talking to people in a posh way, acting like she was above everyone. She even bought a horse to make it seem like she had money, when I knew full well she didn't. She started talking down to me. She asked me to be a bridesmaid at her wedding, and of course, I said yes, though I wish I hadn't now. Then, a couple of months later, we met for coffee, and I told her I was pregnant. I thought she'd be as happy as I was, especially since we'd been trying for a while. But no, according to her, I got pregnant just to ruin her wedding and take the focus off her. Okay. Once we got pregnant, we planned to finally get married before the baby arrived, and we decided to do it on our anniversary. It would be a small wedding with close friends and family. This was only 3 weeks after her wedding, which wasn't ideal, but we wanted to celebrate it on our special day. When her wedding day arrived, she had it in a church, even though she wasn't religious, and he was a very vocal atheist. She wore an expensive wedding dress, and they rented the most expensive hotel in our local city. It was a huge event, which I know weddings often are, and that's fine. It was her special day. I was there for her, helped her, and did everything a bridesmaid was meant to do, even though I had morning sickness. I kept a smile on my face while holding up her ridiculously long veil for most of the day. Then our wedding day came. We had a very small registry office ceremony, which was perfect for us. She sat there looking like she was chewing a lemon, didn't smile once, and after the ceremony, she spoke with my mom, who she'd known for years. My mom said something like, "You'll be used to all this by now?" To which she replied, "Yes, but mine was a lot grander." She came to the reception, which was at our friend's hotel. There were about 30 people max at the reception. She accused my other childhood best friend of playing footsie with my new husband under the table. My friend was not like that at all. She had just caught his foot while crossing her legs. Then, when I finally had my baby, that was the final straw. She visited for the first time in about 6 months and said, "Oh, it's got red hair." She didn't even refer to her by her name at all. That was all she had to say. So, I cut her off. It was the best decision I ever made. I hadn't noticed how toxic she was and how on edge I always felt around her. Now, my husband and I still live in the same little house we did before we got married. We have no debt from the wedding and are still very happy, 6 years after our wedding. Meanwhile, she got into loads of debt from her wedding. Her husband lost his job for gross misconduct and blamed my husband because he got promoted, while her husband crashed a company car and tried to cover it up until the person he hit sued him. They had to sell her horse. And now, 6 years later, the last I heard, they're living in her dad's basement. My sister decided to marry a guy she had been with for less than 4 months. It was her second marriage, and everything happened spur of the moment, less than a month's notice. She wanted us all to fly across Canada for a lovely East Coast wedding. Flying across Canada is expensive, though. At the time, I had just started a new job, and it was imperative that I be at work during her wedding, with absolutely no possibility of time off. if I took time off, I would have been let go. So, I couldn't attend. She didn't speak to me for over a year after that. The marriage lasted less than a year, if that. She took him for everything. He lost his house, his car, and drank himself out of his job. She even took his dog and told him it had been run over. Other family members stepped in and gave him his dog back. She's a peach, and she's still single, if anyone's interested. My first marriage was to a bridezilla. She got drunk before the ceremony, wouldn't dance because she was too anxious about people making fun of her, and tried bragging to my cousins during dinner that our wedding was better than theirs. We were all married within a 2-year span. She invited her ex-boyfriend to the ceremony, who I later found out she had been seeing both before and after our wedding. To top it off, she took the money we received as wedding gifts, which we were planning to use for a house down payment, and spent it on random things. She also had a ton of debt she kept hidden from me. I left her exactly 1 year later and never looked back. Now, I'm happily married to a wonderful woman. There were so many red flags I should have noticed. After the wedding, things went downhill quickly. She spent money faster than she could make it. I ended up taking on a second job, even though I already worked 50+ hours a week, just to cover bills. She stopped going to work and spent evenings out with friends. But I later found out she was seeing her ex. The final straw came when I discovered she was mismanaging the money. I didn't realize at first, but when I'd give her money for bills, she'd often find excuses not to pay them. One day, I got pulled over and was charged with no insurance on my car because she had been using the money for other things. When payment notices would come in the mail, she'd hide them or rip them up. I handed her the separation papers on our 1-year anniversary. That's all for today. Thank you all for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video.